How do we test these gauge systems? Well, testing an electric gauge, whether it's moving iron or thermal, is not rocket science. And now that we know how the systems work, we can diagnose the components quite easily. Let's pretend we have a fuel gauge that's not working. I like to start at the sending unit. This is the part that does all the moving and tends to be the one that fails. So the first thing we want to do is go to the back of the car where the sending unit is and remove the wire that goes to the sending unit. Place the wire someplace where it can't ground. Now remember, that wire is the one that comes off the back of the gauge going to the sending unit. You also need to remember that this is affected directly by how much resistance is encountered at the other end. Well, when I take the wire off of here and just leave it in space, the wire is now encountering infinite resistance. No electricity can get through. Now I jump up into the cockpit, I turn the key on for a few moments, and I watch what the gauge does. The gauge should sweep one way or the other. The next thing I want to do is I want to go back onto the car, or back where the sending unit is, take a known ground and connect that to the wire that usually goes to the sending unit. Remember, that's the wire coming from the gauge. Now, the gauge a moment ago had infinite resistance. Now she has zero resistance. It's a direct short to ground. I turn the key on for a few moments, and when I do, the gauge should sweep, but the other way. She should sweep one way when there's infinite resistance and the other way when there's zero resistance. If our manipulating the resistance by hand causes the gauge to function over one way, over the other way, then probably either have a bad sending unit or the ground of the tank is having a problem. Now, assuming that we do this and we don't get the response that we're looking for, something else is wrong. The next thing you're going to want to do is take that lead that's coming down from the back of the gauge, get your voltmeter out, and connect the lead to the voltmeter, and again, turn your key on for a moment. We need to see if electricity is coming down here at all. Okay? If it is, fine. If it's not, and it probably won't be in this case, we need to go to the other end of the wire. Remember the color of the wire, and go to the back of your dashboard where your gauge rests, and you'll have that same color here because the wire runs from here all the way to there. You'll take, and with your voltmeter, check and see if there's current right there. If there's current there, but there's no current down at the end where the sending unit is, that means that the wire going to the sending unit is either broken, shorted, or it's got a bad connection. You can find that. Okay, now let's assume that we test the back of the gauge and we don't have any power going out. What do we do now? You go to this side of the gauge where the power goes in, put your meter on, connect up there where your wire is connected to it, and then what you want to do is turn your key on for a few moments and you should have power. If I have power going in the gauge but no power comes out of the gauge has a problem. If there's no power going into the gauge, well, what are we looking for? We need to start looking backwards on the feed that goes to this gauge. So what you want to do is get your voltmeter, and then you want to connect the end of it. Of course, you've got one end is grounded. Connect the other end to a small pin or a small nail, and you can go back in the wire and poke through the wire to see if there's voltage and keep going back. Okay, you'll eventually find out where the voltage is stopped. If, however, you have a car which is using a voltage stabilizer, okay, this is probably the place to go checking first. If you have power going into one end of the voltage stabilizer and not coming out the other, you found your problem right away. Okay. You may have noticed in the diagnostic that I've used the expression a few times that you want to turn the key on for just a few moments. The systems in your car can be harmed if the key is left on more for a few moments without running the engine. Okay? Also, these gauges, if they're exposed to zero resistance and they're not ready for that, can also be harmed. So we're only going to run the test long enough to see what's going on. Now we know, with a basic understanding of how these systems work and a voltmeter and a little patience, you can sort out any gauge failure you encounter in your car.